Madhava Kunda Bihari Madhava Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajadana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajadana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanamchari Yamuna Tira Vanamchari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jai Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajadana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajadana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Gaur Premanande Jai Vishnupada Paramahamsa Pri Vrajagatha Justo Tarasatya Sri Srimad Divine Grace Shalabhai Charan Arvind Bhakti Raghava Swami Sri Prabhupada ki Manta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki Skandibiti Founder Charya Divine Grace Sri Prabhupada ki Namacharya Sri Haridas Thakur ki Samavata Bhakti Vrinda ki Harinam Sankirtana ki Gantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki Jangitai Gauda Pimanande. All glories to be assembled devotees. All glories to be assembled devotees. All glories to be assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and to Sri Gauranga. All glories to Sri Prabhupada ki. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Taksurundalitam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Juta Parakamalam Sri Gurun Vaisnavam Sya Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tvam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Sri Visakanditam Sya He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kansana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Siti Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vansakalpa Tarubhyasya Kripa Sindhu Vyaivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Sarasatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is our very means of conquest, let us first offer our respectful obeisances unto Narayana, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, unto Narayana Rishi, the supremmost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Sri Vyasadeva, the author. Nasta prayesha badreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Tamasloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki. By regularly hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam and by rendering service unto the pure devotee, all that is troublesome within the heart becomes destroyed practically to nil, and loving devotional service unto the Supreme Lord, who is praised with transcendental songs, it becomes established as an irrevocable fact. Idam Bhagavatam Nama Puranam Brahmasamitam Uttama Shloka Charitam Chakara Bhagavan Rishi Nishreyasaya Lokasya Dhanyam Swasyayanam Mahat. This Srimad Bhagavatam, known as the Grantara, the king of all Vedic literatures, is the literary incarnation of God. It is compiled by the incarnation of God, the Srila Vyasadeva. It is meant for the ultimate good of all people. It is all successful, all blissful, and all perfect. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Surabhyai Namaha Om Surabhyai Namaha Om Surabhyai Namaha Mukam karoti vacharam pangum langayate girim yatkripa tamaham bande Sri Gurum Dinataranam Yatkripa tamaham bande Sri Gurum Dinataranam. Hare Krishna. Welcome to our morning Bhagavatam class. So we are continuing Canto number 1, chapter 11, entitled Lord Kṛṣṇa, Lord Krishna's entrance into Dvārakā, and text number 23. Swayam cha Gurubhir Viprai Sadarai Sabirair Api Ashirbhir Yujamano Nyair Vandibhish Chavishat Puram Swayam cha Gurubhir Viprai Sadarai Stabirair Api Ashirbhir Yujamano Nyair Vandibhish Chavishat Puram Swayam cha Gurubhir Viprai Sadarai Stavirair Api Ashirbhir Yujamano Nyair Vandibhis Chavishat Puram. Swayam cha gurubhir vipray sadarai stavirai rapi asirbhir yujamano nyair Vande Bisacha Vishat Puram.
Swayam cha gurubhir vipray
Sadarai Svavirai Rapi Sadarai Stavirai Rapi Asirbhir Yujamano Nyair Vande Bischa Vishat Puram.
Swayam cha gurubhir vipray
Swayam Charu Vipray
Sadarai stavirai rapi
Sadarai Stavirai Rapi
Asirbhir yojamano
Asirbhir Yujamano Nyair
Vande Vishatpuram
Vande Bischa Vishat Puram. Swayam Charu
gurubhir vipray
Sadarai Stavirai Rapi Asirbhir Yujamano Nyair Vande Bischa Vishat Puram. Swayam Chagurubhir Vipray Sadarai Stavirai Rapi Asirbhir Yujamano Nyair Vande Bischa Vishat Puram. Swayam Chagurubhir Vipray Sadarai Stavirai Rapi Asirbhir Yujamano Nyair Vande Bischa Vishat Puram.
Swayam cha gurubhir
Vipray
vipray
Sadarai Stavirai Rapi Asirbhir Yujamano Nyair Vande Bischa Vishat Puram. Swayam cha Gurubhir Vipray Sadarai Stavirai Rapi Asirbhir Yujamano Nyair Vande Bischa Vishat Puram. Swayam himself cha also Gurubihi by elderly relatives Vipray by the brāhmaṇas Sadarai with their wives Stabirai invalid Api also Asirbhihi by the blessing of Yujamanaha being praised by Anyai by others Vandibihi admirers Cha and Abhishat entered Puram the city. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Raghava Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Then the Lord personally entered the city, accompanied by elderly relatives and invalid brāhmanas with their wives, all offering benedictions and singing the glories of the Lord. Others also praise the glories of the Lord. Kindly repeat after me. Then the Lord personally entered the city, accompanied by elderly relatives
accompanied by elderly relatives
and invalid brāhmaṇas
and invalid brāhmanas
with their wives,
with their wives,
all offering benedictions
all offering benedictions
and singing the glories of the Lord.
and singing the glories of the Lord.
Others also praised
Others also praise
the glories of the Lord.
the glories of the Lord.
Purport. The brāhmanas in society were never attentive to banking money for future retired life. Haribol. When they were old invalids, they used to approach the assembly of the kings, and simply by praising the glorious deeds performed by the kings, along with their wives, they would be provided with all necessities of life. Voila. Such brahmanas were not, so to speak, flatterers of the kings, but the kings were actually glorified by their actions, and they were sincerely still more encouraged in pious acts by such brahmanas in a dignified way. Lord Sri Krishna is worthy of all glories, and the praying brahmanas and others were glorified themselves by chanting the glories of the Lord. Translation again. Then the Lord personally entered the city, accompanied by elderly relatives and invalid brahmanas with their wives, all offering benedictions and singing the glories of the Lord. Others also praised the glories of the Lord. So the Lord is entering the city of Dvārakā after being received actually by, in the previous verses, after being received by different citizens in the city, and here especially the brahmanas are being described. It mentions about elderly relatives and invalid brahmanas. Means also elderly brahmanas. What is being pointed out here is how these brahmanas were totally dependent on the kings, and not only the brahmanas, of course, every citizen, when they're fortunate to have a qualified king. Qualified king means Vedic kings are qualified primarily because they are described as Raja Rishi, qualified both materially and spiritually. They know how to organize society. They know who within society need a special attention. And brahmanas, of course, are one of those living entities within society who need special attention, special care, special attention. Those are described in the first canto of the Bhagavatam. Brahmanas, women, children, elderly people, and cows. They are especially singled out within society as in need of special attention or special protection. And when such qualified Raja Rishi are there, then such people receive the necessary protection. So in the purport, Prabhupada points out how it's not the business of brahmanas to be, how does he mention it? To be attentive to banking money. And what is being pointed out also is that brahmanas who are primarily meant to cultivate transcendental knowledge and also to assist others to to be active in providing opportunities for others to also cultivate spiritual life. That is meant to be their primary focus. They are less actual brahmanas are less preoccupied with their material situation. Therefore, in the Vedic culture, brahmanas who are primarily teachers, their main activity actually is meant to be teaching. They're not after salary. When we hear of teachers going on strike to get higher salary, which is quite common in modern day society, it's a complete contrast to what Vedic culture is all about. Brahmanas are, in many ways, they take a vow of poverty. Means they are totally dependent on what the Lord will provide. And because their source of happiness is not in anything material. Their source of happiness is a cultivation of higher consciousness. Their source of happiness is their becoming more and more aware of the Lord. And the more they are advanced in such consciousness, then naturally, when they are fortunate to have a qualified king, in this case, of course, is the supreme qualified king, the supreme personality of Godhead, Krishna himself. So naturally, they will engage in glorifying such a personality. So in the purport, Prabhupada points out, it's not that they glorify the king to flatter the king with the idea of getting some kind of benediction, material benediction, or no. They spontaneously, naturally glorify the king because they understand the nature of the Lord. that that he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, um, who actually is um, by his qualities brings so much of auspiciousness within society. One of the foremost duties and responsibility of a Rajarshi is to actually bring the citizens, bring his dependents closer towards self-realization. Is to not only look after the material well-being of the citizens, but to make arrangements so that they can be advanced spiritually. Both are taken care of by a qualified king. So in many ways, Vedic culture uh, is an exalted culture because it gives importance and it makes arrangements for cultivating, for training such type of leaders. There are three main leaders which in Vedic culture everyone depends upon. Leader means by nature someone upon whom we can rely, upon whom we can depend. Leader means someone who by nature, naturally, will be respected, will be glorified, isn't it? and therefore the whole uh, Vedic education is meant especially to train such type of leaders. When a village or when a nation or when a country or any community has a qualified leader, that community will function properly. In Kali Yuga, especially at this particular time, there is a scarcity of leaders. There's a scarcity of materially qualified leaders. There's a scarcity of spiritually qualified leaders. and therefore, as Prabhupada would express, headless society, modern day society, modern day civilization is characterized especially by being headless. Headless means without leader. The head in the body is leading the body, and the brain, intelligence. The head is the most important part of the body. We may lose one limb, but we can still function. If we lose the head, that's it. We cannot function, right? So that's why brāhmaṇas, who are the head of society, are the most respected and honored. Even though king is very much outwardly, king is we could say in many ways outwardly the most respected, because he's he's interacting with people, he's engaged in so many activities, he's like in the public eye. But behind the king is the brāhmana. Behind qualified leader, one can only become a qualified leader in society if he has a qualified guru. And qualified guru means brāhmana, who is there to actually teach. And brahmanas, because they're meant to be less concerned about their bodily situation, because of their natural cultivation of spiritual life, transcendental knowledge, they will naturally understand who is a qualified person in terms of leadership in society. And of course, the most qualified of all individuals is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. So when Krishna is returning to Dvārakā, these elderly brahmanas, many of whom in old days we become invalid, the body reaches the fifth stage. There are 6 stages that we all go through. Huh? Dwindling stage. Very good. Very nice word. Dwindling. It starts happening from the age of 40. Who's close to 40 here? Actually, it's happening earlier in Kali Yuga, the dwindling stage of life. There is birth, then there is growth, then there is
Creating byproducts.
production. Yeah, byproducts means you get married, you have children. Byproduct, children. Then we stay for some time. So happy. And then number 5, the dwindling. Dwindling means the body starts to malfunction. Eyesight, hearing, start walking with a cane or crutches or wheelchair, whatever. And then the last stage, 6th stage, we leave the body. Yeah. So, but those who are cultivating transcendental knowledge, devotees, whether they are brahmanas or not brahmanas, that is special feature. Actually, in Vedic culture, anyone, one does not have to be a brahmana. Anyone within society who cultivates, then he can learn also to develop that what is foremost within brahmanas. Brahmanas are especially qualified by being detached. All Vedic culture is teaching us how to become more and more detached, how to become more absorbed in especially spiritual activities, and and part of that spiritual activity or spiritual consciousness is is to be engaged in glorifying the Lord. And this is what the brahmanas are engaged in doing, and they are less preoccupied by the material situation, but they are cared for automatically, by qualified kings. Mm. And Prabhupada also makes the point that by such activity, brahmanas, and we could say devotees, because Prabhupada explains how when one becomes a Vaishnava, when one strives to become a Vaishnava, then that very activity in itself is glorious, and not only are here brahmanas are engaged in glorifying the Lord, And by that activity, they also become glorified, isn't it? Brahmanas are not looking after glorification, but by their activity of glorifying Krishna, they also become glorified. Actually, devotees are not looking after praise or recognition, but automatically that praise and recognition actually comes. There's that obvious, very nice example. I think anyone who has read that Leela, that pastime, comes to mind. Madhavendra Puri, who was one very exalted, Madhavendra Puri was an example of a very qualified Brahmana. He had taken a particular vow which very few people dare to take. He had taken the vow of never asking, and by nature actually Brahmanas, they can do what is called madhukari. Madhukari, madhu means honey. Honey is sweet. And honey is, how is honey produced? It's produced by the bees going to, it's calculated that bees go to hundreds, if not thousands of flowers every day to collect little, then that's how honey. So madhukari means, in Vrindavan especially, we see saintly persons, they go from house to house to collect 1 or 2 chapatis, not more. Little. So householders, everyone can give little something. So there's a vow that some people, very few actually, take of not even doing madhukari, means of not asking, completely full, 108% dependence on the Lord. Whether if I have, so that means if you do madhukari, some days you will fast, or some weeks you may fast, many days you may fast, may not have a place to stay, whatever. So that in itself is indicating the high level of consciousness of an individual. And Madhavendra Puri was favored by the Lord actually in one particular pastime where he had visited a temple which is called Rimuna, which is in the province of Orissa, nowadays called Odisha. So Rimuna, they have nice, I mean, Gopinath deity, very nicely cared for by the local brāhmaṇas, and the specialty there is that they offer this, what is called kheer. Kheer is just like boiled down milk. It becomes like not solid, still, but thick, and very, very tasty. So Madhavendra Puri, when he was, there's many leelas regarding Madhavendra Puri, but when he was on his way to Jagannath Puri, he was in Vrindavan, and the Lord had appeared to him, and then he went to, on his way to Jagannath Puri, stopping in Rimuna, which is not too far from the border actually of Bengal and Orissa. I think less than 100 kilometers. And there he had taken darshan of the Lord, and was noticing how they were very nicely preparing various foodstuffs, especially this kheer. And because he had taken this vow, he was thinking in his mind, oh, this kheer must taste so wonderful. Then he kind of like immediately thought that he had offended or committed an offense by kind of like, desiring that kheer, and he immediately left. And then that evening, actually, the brahmana who was serving the deity had a dream. The Lord appeared to him and he told him, you go on the altar, you forgot to take out one pot of kheer, because at night they offer kheer in clay pots. To this day, traditionally in the Vedic, in the temples, they would use what is natural, clay, like in Jagannath Puri. Even now they do. Very nice system. Nothing goes to waste. So the pujari, after getting this instruction in his dream, he went. He got the clay pot, and in the dream, the Lord had told him, "You take this clay pot and you give it to this Madhavendra Puri." So in the middle of the night, he, after getting the pot from the altar, then he was calling out. He was looking for this Madhavendra Puri. And Madhavendra Puri actually had left, and not too far away he had gone, and he was sitting under a tree, and he was chanting the holy name and had dozed off. Then when he heard his name, Madhavendra, then he woke up. Says, who's calling? Then this brahmana came to him, offered his obeisances. You're so fortunate. The Lord appeared to me and told that I should bring this kheer to you. So Madhavendra Puri was in total ecstasy, of course. He probably might have been fasting a few days. So the brahmana then offered obeisances, went back to the temple, and Madhavendra Puri, he thought, well, he took a little bit of the kheer, and he thought, wow, this is really, this brahmana is not, he's going to tell everybody. So I better leave this place, because as soon as people know this miracle, no, the Lord appeared to him, people are going to come and they'll want to offer obeisances to me. They'll want to praise me. They'll want like that. So he immediately left, actually, and he proceeded towards Jagannath Puri. And there's a place, King Prataparudra, the king of Orissa, his capital was in Cuttack. Cuttack is, I don't know, maybe 60 kilometers or something before Jagannath Puri. So, so in the middle of the night, before the sunrise, he left and on his way to Cuttack. When he reached Cuttack, the news already reached before him. The news already reached that this person was favored by the Lord, who gave him this kheer. So Prabhupada, this is narrated in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and Prabhupada explains that, just see, the devotee makes an effort. He tries not to be glorified, but in spite of his attempts to not be glorified, not to be recognized, the Lord makes arrangements actually to glorify his devotee. So this is being mentioned here, that actually automatically, not only the Lord is glorified here with the brahmanas who are chanting the glories of the Lord, but whoever actually engages in such activities, whoever remembers the Lord remembers them in so many different ways like that. So that is nicely being mentioned here. That means we should not be, whether we are brahmanas or not, Vaishnavas are meant to actually develop, and they gradually do develop all the qualities of a brahmana. A Vaishnava means someone who is automatically developing or having the qualities of a brahmana, because Vaishnava means one who is in proper knowledge, who has cultivated knowledge, and that is one of the qualities, one of the 9 qualities of brahmana. So this is one of the important activities for not only brahmanas, for devotees in general. We should either through different prayers that are written by Vaishnavas or through the various literatures such as Bhagavatam, by reading and hearing from Bhagavatam, that very activity is the glorification of the Lord also. Means we take necessary time to hear about the Lord, to speak about the Lord, to remember the Lord. So reading the verse again. Then the Lord personally entered the city accompanied by elderly relatives and invalid brāhmaṇas with their wives, all offering benedictions and singing the glories of the Lord. Others also praise the glories of the Lord. It is praising, glorifying is one of the 9 processes of bhakti. Savanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Bandhanam, prayers. Prayers is one of the important activities in bhakti devotional service. So any comments or thoughts on this? Yes.
Thank you. Please, Maharaj, can we have some idea about how people used to travel?
A summary on how people used to travel.
Yes, like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is going to Vrindavan.
Yes.
How he can reach really Vrindavan without a Google map?
Without a Google map. Yes.
Without direction pancas.
Without direction.
To Vrindavan, not to another
signboards. Without signboards.
Okay, signboards. Yeah.
Yeah, signboards. Yeah.
Yeah, correct. Yes.
That time no signboard, no Google map, but they used to travel very long distance.
Right,
So
right.
They used to do that thing very easy.
Well, because just because there were no highways doesn't mean there were no roads. Yeah. There were roads. There were. We hear from Chaitanya Charitamrita that Lord Chaitanya, for example, when he finally, after a long time, he was trying to get the permission from Jagannath Puri to go to Vrindavan, and that's a long distance. And to avoid being detected and to avoid being honored and whatnot, he did not take the public road. So 500 years ago, there were public roads. He took to the forest. That's why he went through the Jarikanda forest and blessed all the animals. We were reading that just recently. So there were people who knew who were more let's say knowledgeable about traveling, and people knew about north, east, south, and west. People had knowledge of stars, just like people who would travel on ship also. they get directions from stars in different ways. And so there were, we call them roads today, but there were paths, or there were trails, and there were individuals who were more knowledgeable about, you know, just like even now in different countries, especially like in Bali or Cambodia, there are people who are um, guides, tourist guides. So there were people, even now if you go to Nepal or some places where it's not so easily accessible, there are people who know the place. So most people actually who would travel very often, uh, most people who travel for the first time, or not so often. So they would take guidance from people who were knowing, who were traveling more, etc., like that. And um, brāhmaṇas are the ones who, like from Shastra, learn so many things about where different locations are, like dhams. You see, previously people would travel basically to the holy dham. We were reading a few days back how in previous times, whatever people would do, it would be connected um, with God consciousness. Before we were talking about the Industrial Revolution and the French Revolution, before a few hundred years ago, anything that people did, whatever people would write, I mean, only educated people would write because they were educated, and the only educated people were generally brāhmanas. They were, because they had received in Gurukul what we call academic education. So brāhmanas were the learned people in society, and from Shastra, like, you know, there is what is called Vedic geography. and then there would be people who would be more connected with, or more knowledgeable about um, locations and geography and things like that. And depending on where people would travel, they would have they would prepare themselves in different ways. Um, I'm sure there are many um, uh, aspects that nowadays we have totally forgotten. We don't know because we travel by car, and because we have the Google Map, as you mentioned, and other ways, you know, our cell phone. But yeah, it's amazing how people would do so many things in a more simple and natural way, depending on a lot on nature, number one, and also, well, number one actually is depending on brahmanas who had so much of knowledge about these different holy places that are described, uh, and all kinds of information are there in the Shastra. um, and they would they would do things based on Shastra. Just like if you have to cut a tree, I had that experience some years back in Indonesia. We had some land where mostly we had teak trees, teak wood, and I wanted to build a small goshala there. So I spoke to the local people from whom we had purchased the land, and they said, "Yeah, we'll build a goshala, but you have to wait 3 weeks." I said, "Why? I want it now." Western mind, right? They said, "No, you can't have it now because trees can only be cut on this date. There's certain dates and certain times and a certain process to even cut one tree. There are ways and systems to do everything, actually, in the Vedic culture, most of which is unknown today because we don't follow the Vedic culture. I mean, general mass of people. And that is partly what we are meant to introduce as teachers of the Vedic. Well, first of all, we have to learn ourselves. We have to learn what is the Vedic culture? What are the Vedic teachings? And what are the Vedic teachings, not only in terms of what's going on in the spiritual world, but also what is going on and what is meant to go on in the material world, isn't it? So in other words, all kinds of material sciences, just like Jyotish, which is something you're connecting, let's say, with Varna selection. So all of this knowledge, that's why Vedic culture is rich, extremely rich in knowledge, in material knowledge as well as spiritual knowledge. And that's what the whole Vedic culture is based on, these different sciences, and we are meant to systematically introduce this knowledge, introduce these sciences. And Prabhupada gave us that direction or that instruction by establishing Varnashram colleges, isn't it? I've not studied so closely in terms of when did Prabhupada instruct about, let's say, Brahminical culture in the context of Bhakti Shastri and Bhakti Vaibhav and Bhakti Vedanta and what is it, Sarvabhauma, the different levels, which was, those teachings are primarily for Brahmanas, isn't it? So Prabhupada gave those instructions quite early, actually, in the movement, and then possibly a little bit later, he spoke about the need to also write up or formulate curriculum for not only Brahmanas but also for Kshatriya, Vaishyas, and Shudras, right? So that's a different curriculum that hasn't been made yet. We have to a large extent the curriculum for Brahmanas, isn't it? But society is not only made up of Brahmanas, rather the opposite. Practically there are no Brahmanas, or even in the most ideal society, unless you're living in such a yuga, everyone's Brahmana. But in the other yugas, especially Kali Yuga, we have much less. So that is part of what Brahmanas are meant to be doing also, training everyone in the basic principles of Krishna consciousness, but especially also training, coming back to the point we were making at the beginning of our presentation this morning, training leaders in terms of Brahmanas, and real qualified Brahmana, again, must also strike the proper balance between a theme that we bring up again and again, between material swadharma and spiritual swadharma. And then training individuals who will actually be qualified kshatriyas, qualified leaders for villages, qualified leaders for any community. And then training leaders, Vaishyas. Vaishyas are actually leaders. And to get qualified Vaishyas is also very rare. The rarest are Brahmanas. Second rare is Kshatriyas. Third rare is Vaishya. And all three are absolutely necessary for society to properly function. Starting to hear noise. We must be close to 7 o'clock. We're 2 minutes away. So we can get some information from by reading what they did, like during the time of Mahaprabhu, when they would travel, all the devotees from Bengal.
Pathway guiders are there, Maharaj.
Huh?
Pathway guiders were there.
Pathway
guiders.
Yes. Yeah.
They knows that particular route, especially which leads that in a short time.
Yes. And they would know. It's just like when Mahaprabhu was on his way leaving Orissa. So before entering Bengal, King Prataparudra had sent with him many men. And then at one point they said, okay, now we can't go on the other side because you have to, when you cross this river, then you come in unprotected land. It was ruled by Muslims. And then we read that, right? And then because on the other side of the river they had sent a spy to find out, because they'd heard, oh, some kind of great personality has come. And then the spy, when he went back and told the king, then the king became curious and he said, I want to go and see. And he came in disguise, and then he met with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And because of the presence and the Shakti, actually he started to chant Hare Krishna and became a devotee also. And then they made arrangements. So I mean, all these things were there.
In the case of Sanatana Goswami also, when he left for Vrindavan from Odisha, it was same situation.
Yeah. So, yes. Okay, it's time to enter another time of the day. Yes. Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki Jai Sri Prabhupada ki
Jai.
Gaur
Bhakti Raghava Swami Maharaj